John and Mike, oh here we go. Ready for the Jen and Mike Show. Topics made easy, caught in the flow. Let's dive in with Jen and Mike, yo.
Okay, so let's be honest. The creator economy, it's kind of like everyone's talking about it, right?
Yeah, it's true.
But are we in like a full-blown hype cycle, or is there some real substance here?
Right.
Well, today we are diving into some fascinating data and news from the information. Try and get a grip on that very question.
Okay, sounds good.
So we're going to be taking a look at what's up with funding and the creator economy, the role of generative AI, even how like politics are factoring into all of this.
Wow.
So buckle up. This is going to be an interesting one.
Yeah, and what's really cool about this deep dive is we're not just throwing opinions around, you know?
Right.
We're basing this on the Information's Creator Economy database, right?
Very interesting.
So this is a database that tracks hundreds of startups, their funding rounds, acquisitions, even when things go belly up.
Okay.
So we can actually see where the money is going, or perhaps more importantly, where it's not going, and really understand the trends driving this evolving landscape.
And it sounds like the money may be drying up a bit, right?
Yeah, a little bit, a little bit.
At least that's what the numbers from Q3 of this year are suggesting. Anyone who's been following this space knows the funding landscape can be a bit of a roller coaster.
Yeah, that's true.
So maybe you can walk us through what's been happening lately.
Yeah, absolutely. So the first half of the year was actually looking pretty rosy for creator economy investments, but then Q3 hit and things took a bit of a turn.
A turn for the worse.
Yeah, you could say that. Globally, funding dropped by about 20% year over year.
Wow, 20%. That's not insignificant.
Not at all.
And I thought with all the hype around AI, things were supposed to be exploding right now.
You're right. AI has been getting a ton of buzz, and it's definitely a factor, but it's not the whole story. Earlier this year, a big part of the funding boom was driven by a few massive deals, particularly in the AI space.
So like a handful of companies were skewing the numbers?
Yeah, exactly. Think back to, for instance, companies like Create Music Group, which raised a whopping $165 million. Or Flip, that social shopping app that managed to snag $144 million. These were outliers, not really the norm.
Okay, so like a couple of big fish in a relatively small pond.
Exactly.
And that makes sense because looking at the data from Q3, there were some interesting companies that received funding, but nothing on that scale.
Yeah, that's true.
Like you have Spoon Labs, which all about audio and get this Korean dramas.
Yeah.
Then there's Story Protocol, which uses blockchain technology for intellectual property. I don't even know what that means, but it sounds fancy.
Right.
And Captions, an AI-powered video editing tool. All cool companies, but not exactly moving the needle in the same way as those earlier deals.
Exactly. And that's where this reality check starts to set in.
Okay.
Those mega deals, they kind of vanished in Q3, and now investors are getting a lot more cautious, especially when you consider the track record of some of these creator economy startups.
Yeah, because not all of them are created equal, are they?
Not at all. Not at all. In fact, the data shows that more than 27 creator economy startups have actually gone under since 2021.
Wow.
Which, you know, that's bound to make investors a little bit hesitant, right?
Yeah, 27 is more than a few. I mean, do any specific examples come to mind?
Well, one that stands out is Koo, the Indian social media platform. Remember that one? It was supposed to be the next big thing to rival Twitter.
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
Yeah. Didn't quite work out that way, did it?
Yeah.
And that's a perfect illustration of why investors are pumping the brakes a bit. It's not just about chasing the next shiny object anymore. It's about putting money into businesses with real staying power.
Which brings us back to generative AI.
Yeah.
Because on the one hand, it's got so much potential, but on the other,
it's a big question mark.
Right.
Huge question mark for investors.
And is that a question we're going to unpack a bit more?
Oh, absolutely. We're going to dig into that in just a moment. Don't go away.
So generative AI, I feel like we can't have a conversation about the creator economy without talking about AI these days.
Right. It's everywhere you look.
But I'm curious, from an investor's standpoint, is it like the golden ticket everyone's hoping for, or is there more to it than that?
It's definitely more nuanced, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
It's not as simple as just, you know, throwing money at anything with AI in the name anymore, right?
Right.
Investors are starting to ask tougher questions, you know, like, can this company actually deliver?
Right.
What's their actual business model?
Are they just riding the hype wave, or are they actually innovative?
Exactly, exactly. And the information even has this, it's called the Generative AI Takeover List, which sounds kind of ominous, right?
It does sound a little ominous, like, should we be scared?
No, Not necessarily, but it does highlight how generative AI is impacting, well, pretty much everything.
Okay, so less scary, more just like a sign of the times.
Exactly.
So how does this takeover list play into the whole funding landscape we were talking about?
Well, it shows that AI is a major driver of investment, but also that there's a lot of, well, maneuvering happening behind the scenes.
Okay.
So you have companies like Captions, which we talked about earlier, still attracting significant funding.
Right.
But then you have bigger players making strategic moves, like the data pointed to Runway, the AI video startup, potentially getting acquired for a cool $450 million.
Wow.
And then there's Opal, the AI webcam company, which OpenAI seems to be interested in, maybe a $60 million investment there.
Interesting. So those were still like pending deals, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Still in the works, not finalized. And that kind of uncertainty, it plays into the overall caution we're seeing from investors.
Yeah. Because nothing's guaranteed in the tech world, is it?
Especially not these days.
It's interesting, though, because it's not just about these like brand new AI startups trying to make a splash.
Right.
The established platforms are having to adapt to this whole creator economy thing too, right?
Absolutely. They have to, or they'll get left behind.
Right.
And they're pulling out all the stops to stay relevant.
So like what kind of moves are we talking about here?
Well, Instagram, for instance, they're really pushing to integrate music more deeply into Reels, even for regular photo posts.
Interesting.
Clearly feeling the heat from TikTok, trying to give creators more tools to work with, keep them engaged.
Right, because if you don't innovate, you stagnate.
Exactly.
And then on a completely different note, you have Duolingo. Remember Duolingo? The language learning app?
Yeah, with a little green owl.
Yeah, that's the one. Well, apparently their owl mascot is now a webcomic star.
Oh, wow. Really? I did not know that.
I know. It sounds kind of random, but it shows how even these like established brands are finding ways to tap into this creator-driven world.
Absolutely, yeah.
And speaking of tapping into new worlds, about politics.
Oh, yeah, because nothing says creator economy like a good old presidential campaign.
Right, right.
Well, there-
And get this, cheaper insulin is somehow part of the conversation. I'm not even kidding.
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting time to be following politics online.
So how does cheaper insulin play into all of this?
Well, it's become like this unexpected talking point on these platforms where creators have a lot of influence.
Oh.
Like take Kamala Harris's campaign, for example. The data showed that they've really gone all in on Snapchat.
Interesting.
Spent something like over $5 million on ads there.
Wow.
Which, I mean, it makes sense strategically, right?
Right.
Trump's banned from the platform. They see an opportunity to reach younger voters.
Right.
But it also highlights how important these platforms are becoming for political messaging, you know?
So it's like instead of those traditional campaign ads, it's all about reaching voters through the creators they follow online.
Exactly. And it's not just Snapchat. Remember we were talking about those Facebook ads earlier? The whole daily scroll thing?
Well, yeah, with all the positive stories about Harris.
Right. So it looks like organic content, but it's actually driven by some pretty hefty ad spending.
Wow, so they're like gaming the algorithm to control the narrative.
In a way, yeah. And it raises this really interesting question. Are these tactics actually effective? Or are campaigns just throwing money at a trend?
Right, because just because everyone's on social media, it doesn't mean you can just, like, assume that's the only place people are getting their information from.
Exactly. And that's what makes this whole thing so fascinating to me.
Right.
It's this constantly evolving landscape. The lines between, you know, traditional media, social platforms, political messaging, it's all blurring together.
Yeah, it's like trying to hit a moving target.
Exactly.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground today. We've talked about the dip in creator economy funding, the role of AI, the strategies of big platforms, even how politicians are trying to leverage the power of creators.
Yeah, it's a lot to take in.
It really is. But if there's one thing our listeners should take away from this deep dive, what would it be?
I think the biggest takeaway is that the creator economy is here to stay. It might be going through some growing pains, there might be some bumps in the road, but it's not going anywhere.
So for all those aspiring creators out there, don't let the funding dip discourage you. Just be smart, be strategic, and most importantly, keep creating.
Absolutely.
And for everyone else, pay attention to what's happening in this space because it's impacting all of us, whether we realize it or not. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep creating.
John and Mike, oh here we go. Ready for the John and Mike show. Topics made easy, caught in the flow. Let's dive in with John and Mike, yo.